Hello and welcome to my first video on adding value to your drawings. So what I have here is a drawing of a deer skull. So it looks like a doe. And in the preparatory drawings I've provided, you can see I started with our crosshairs, and then I blocked out the drawing, and I did a planar drawing, and then over the planes I mapped out a complex contour. So this is the architecture, the underlying architecture of our value drawings, and this is the reason why we've taken all these other steps before we get to this point. So what I have to work with are materials from the kit. I've got an HB pencil. I have a 2B pencil and I have a 4B pencil. So pencils of varying values. So they go darker and lighter, as I've described before. Value here, when I say value, I'm referring to the relative amount of light within a drawing. Light and the absence of light, which is dark, is what we're seeking to communicate here. So we're really beginning to create the illusion of the third dimension through adding value. So what we have here with this preparatory drawing is something that's often called a closed form drawing. So closed form just means that we have an outline that we're working with. And now we're going to be working towards an open form drawing, which means we're going to make the lines disappear. Lines, I think generally as they're thought of by most students, don't necessarily exist in nature. They're an abstraction. They're meant to delineate different areas, so either between positive and negative space. So positive space referring to the matter, anything you can touch, like the skull, and the negative space, so the area around the skull, and then the different areas of light within it, and the different forms of the different structures of the skull. So on the graphic above this video, um, we have five different zones of light, and this is really going to be the only work I'm going to do in the videos. I'm going to fill those fill these squares in to use as a reference. I guess I should also tell you what else I have that I'm working with here today. So I've also got my Hake brush for cleaning things up. I've got a couple of white plastic erasers that work really well for picking up the graphite. For blending, I've got a blending stump. This is really for just kind of like small areas. You can also use like a rolled up paper towel or something. You can twist it into a knot or cone. And then I've got this soft bristled acrylic brush, which is I'm going to use for larger areas. If you want to work with brushes, that's great. Just make sure they're clean. You want something with really nice soft bristles. So we'll use those to even out our different areas of light and dark. And then we've got a piece of scrap paper here too. And the scrap paper is going to be what you rest your hand on while you are drawing. So you don't want your hand to actually be in contact with the paper, because your hand, see, it's kind of hot in my studio, so my hands are a little sweaty. But even if it wasn't hot in here, your hands produce a lot of sweat and oil to protect your skin. And when that rests directly on the paper, that oil seeps into the paper, and then your graphite will stick to that, and you can't erase it. So you'll end up with like little fingerprints, smudge marks that won't go away. So it's very important to use something like this. I sometimes have little cotton gloves that I cut the fingers off of too that I'll wear. So that's what I'm going to be using for the demo. So I'm going to, like I said, I'm going to start off with kind of filling these areas in as reference. So, in one of the other graphics you see above this video, there's something called the classical order of light that goes through 9 different areas of light. I would think that if they're not infinite gradations of light, then I would be so bold as to say they're near infinite gradations of light between an absolute light and an absolute dark. But that makes it really difficult to work with when you're in your beginning stages. So I like to work with just 5, just to make it really easy. So 1, this is the white of the page. Okay, so this is as bright as the page will go. You can't go without adding like white charcoal or paint. You can't go any whiter than this, and this is a pretty white page. 5 is the absolute darkest you can go with what you have available, and these are your deep, deep shadows, and these are your highlights here. These are your highlights. You shouldn't have many of these, and you may not have many of these either. These really deep, deep shadows. So with the 3 pencils we have available in the kit, your 4B, which is your darkest, your softest one, that really fills in this niche right here pretty well. Your 4s and your 5s. Your 2B, 3s and the 4s, and your HB, your 2s and your 3s. Now your 2B can go this way, can do some lighter marks, as can your 4B. There's a lot of variation in there based on how much pressure you're putting on the pencil. So I suggest keeping things nice and light. Keep it light until you get it right. So I generally start off with the HB, and I begin by blocking in some of the large areas of shadow, and then I gradually go darker. If you go too dark too fast, which is something that can often happen in the early stage, I mean, it can happen at any stage of your drawing career or practice, I should say. If you go too dark too fast, maybe you realize later it's not the right value relationship, and you want to change it, and you can't. It's too dark. So one of the things that's really important also to remember, and if you look at that graphic, the graphic above on my website that has like that long rectangle in the middle. So that long rectangle, I don't know if you notice this, if you read the caption, that is all one shade of gray, but it looks lighter on one side because of a darker background, and lighter on one side darker on one side because of a lighter background, and lighter on the other side because of a darker background. I hope I said that right. So the point is being that your experience of value is subjective. So what you're really looking for are relationships within your drawing. So it's one area lighter than the one next to it. There's a darker than the one next to it, and don't necessarily think of what you're seeing as the absolute take on it, absolute final objective take on it. Again, your experience of light, it changes based on so many variables. It changes on, your visual field, what all is in your visual field, how your eyes adjust. So we're talking about relative relationships here. So I did my 5. Here's my 1. I'm going to go and switch to my 2B. And I'm going to keep this kind of somewhere in between there. I might come back and change it. This is just something for you to reference. So as you're drawing, I want you to do this value scale down to here. And as you're looking at your drawing, I want you to think like, oh, what value is this? Maybe I've drawn that as a 5, but is that really a 5? Because maybe it's a 4. So that's why we use this sort of terminology here. Okay. So I kind of subjectively, that's roughly in between these two. I'm going to go ahead and fill in 2 and 4, and then I might come in again and adjust things. All about relationships. So I've mentioned this in previous videos too. If you have trouble kind of seeing the different areas of light and shadow, then you can try squinting your eyes. And then you lose a lot of detail and just see sort of the larger shapes, larger areas of shadow. Okay. I'll go a little darker here. And then maybe just a touch darker there. A little darker here. There you go. Okay, so now we have our value scale here that we're going to be using at 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. All right, so that's as much as I'm going to do in this video. I'm just kind of explaining my setup and what it is you're about to see in the time lapse. So it's much easier for me, and probably much easier for you, to see a time lapse that's sped up about 12 times as fast as it should be, or as it was filmed, so you can see how quickly this progresses. One thing you're going to notice, like I said, is I'm going to start off with the HB, and I'm going to slowly go darker with my 2B and my 4B. I'm going to come in with my brush, and I'm going to do some light blending in there, not too heavy. Don't blend too much. And I'm going to come back in and I'm going to redraw some of the light with my eraser. So we're actually going to draw with our erasers. Our erasers are mark making tools. One thing that I want you to know, or if you don't or notice, is that when I make my marks, if you think back to our lesson on hatching and cross hatching, I said, let's keep our marks moving in the same direction of the plane. To emphasize the shape of what it is we're drawing. We're going to do the same thing here. All your marks are moving in that direction. They might be a lot closer, they might be blended, but they're all generally moving in a direction that describes the curvature of your subject. One thing that's really easy for students to do in these beginning stages, they go, they see these different areas, and they think, well, this is definitely, let's say this is a 4 and this is a 3, and the people will leave just a really hard transition from one area to the next. Hard transitions imply sharp corners, like this right here. That's going to be a hard transition because there's a sharp corner of shadow here and some reflected light here. So that would be a sharp transition from dark to light to indicate a sharp a corner. But then, like around here in the cranium, it's going to be a much easier gradient from light to dark and then to light again, the reflected light within here, so to indicate that there's, this has curvature. So it's like a sphere, an egg shape there. All right, so that's all I'm going to say for this, and now I'm going to go to the time lapse.